is Hannah, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about some LGBT books that I can actively recommend. I loved these books, and they all have LGBT plus rep in them, which is perfect for Pride Month next month. So if you're looking for some books to add to your TBR for Pride Month, these are the ones that I would absolutely recommend and why. And if there are books that you think, based on these recommendations, that you think I will like, please leave them as a comment down below. Let's start with the L element of LGBT with The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes. This is a story about a young girl who essentially has to move school when she is outed at her previous school. She is in love with her best friend. She tries to kiss her best friend. Best friend does not have reciprocal feelings, and then actively bullies her because of it. So she moves school, she goes with her brother to a new school, but it is a Catholic school. So she's now not only got to pretend that she's not LGBT because she's been bullied for it in the past, but because it is actively seen as a negative thing by her family, by her peers, etc., and certainly by her cohort at school. It is a heartbreaking story, but also genuinely really funny, genuinely really good. The actual love story in this is not the heartbreaking element to it. I don't want to spoil too much, but there are definite trigger warnings for suicide ideation and mental health. The second book follows her brother who has bipolar, so that is a bit of a spoiler, just the fact that there's more in this series. But the reason I really liked this one is because you have a variety of bisexual, pansexual, LGBT characters who are all dealing with the trauma of coming out and their identity in a variety of different ways, some more healthy than others, and some because the environment is more open than others. And I feel like as representation goes, I really liked the real mix of that, but also the fact that there are a lot of different ways that people can explore their sexuality and feel seen in this book, with the addition of Latinx representation as well from a Latinx author. It is incredibly Americanized, but I didn't see that as a problem. I thought it was really fun. So I think if you're looking for heartbreak and a good time and some sapphic representation, this is a great place to start. This book, Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe, was gifted to me by Abby from Abbey of Pelennor, and I think they gifted it to me, it was on my wish list. I think I'd added it because someone told me that it was historical sapphic rep. And at the time, I think I had just finished reading These Violent Delights. I was very much looking for more LGBT rep in the Asian diaspora. This one is set during the 1950s, where LGBT rights are kind of on the rise, but are by no means accepted. The main character in this understands from quite a young age that she is not like the other girls in her class. She tries to have boyfriends and it just doesn't work for her. And then when she starts to fall in love with a friend of hers, they start visiting the Telegraph Club, which is an out and proud speakeasy type bar. Now, there is a whole bunch of stuff that goes into this. There is racial abuse, there is homophobia, there is a variety of different things they have to deal with. But what's really interesting is the flashbacks that her family have related to their love story, and how that internalized homophobia was even more powerful than the external homophobia of the society they were living in. Really interesting mix, but a really cute romance as well at the heart of this. I would argue this is more historical romance than it is kind of just LGBT. I think it's really interesting that the history is such a large part of the LGBT narrative in this, but well worth a read because of that. And then my wildcard recommendation for sapphic and lesbian romance is Darkwood by Gabby Hutchinson Crouch. Now, this is a middle grade retelling of all of the fairy tales. It is a trilogy, it's part 1 of 3, and it is so funny. So funny. I fully believe that the main character in this, Gretel, is asexual. I just feel that that is an accurate representation of her and the way she deals with people around her. I'm pretty sure there is a bisexual relationship in this as well, but Snow White in this is not the Snow White that we would come to understand from Disney, or even the traditional myth of her being put upon by the wicked stepmother. In this, she is a warrior queen who is waiting to take back her throne, but is also a witch hiding out in the woods, and she falls in love with the gingerbread witch. And it's such a subtle, cute little romance, intermingled with everything else, but it is such a wholesome sapphic representation of a relationship that I just couldn't help but recommend it. It's one of those ones where I know lots of people have a real issue with forcing the LGBT agenda on young people, but actually if you want young people to explore their own identity, it is a factor of that. And having it in this way where it's just there, it's just understood, it's not necessarily the key focus of the narrative, but in a middle grade where it is accessible for them to understand and ask questions, what's not to like about that? So I really, really liked this book. I really, really like the story. It's so funny. Gabby Hutchinson Crouch is one of the authors that works on horrible histories. So if you enjoy that kind of humour, this is it. This is a good time, but with that addition of sapphic representation. When it comes to gay representation, I feel like these are going to be books that you have been recommended time and time again, but somehow I've managed to do the same thing where I have a contemporary gay representation book, a historical gay representation book, and then a wild card representation book, which was completely unintentional, but apparently that's just where my reading falls, and that's fair enough. So the obvious contemporary is Heartstopper. This is such a cute gay romance. One of the main characters is bisexual, but the other one is gay. They fall in love. It's really cute. You've seen this everywhere. Volume 6 is coming out soon, and that, I think, is a justifiable reason to pick them all up again and reread, which is what I'm planning on doing when volume 6 comes out, because I plan to read that. And I haven't read volume 5 yet, but I'm 4 volumes in, and this is just the cutest little romance. I just love it so much. It does look at mental health and suicide ideation, bullying and homophobia, etc. as well. I feel like a lot of times those themes are interlinked, purely because coming out, the pressure of social norms, etc. We're in a very cis-het society. That's not going to surprise anybody. So the idea of going against that is going to be quite jarring, and it is difficult for people and their mental health and their mental well-being. But this handles it so, so well. It is so delicate in its handling of how those emotions are presented. The graphics are beautiful. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Equally, I don't think my historical gay pick is going to surprise you at all either, because that is Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This book was everywhere. The special editions were everywhere. It is a stunning, stunning book of two boys falling in love and being torn away from each other. It is desperately, desperately sad, but such a good representation of slow burn friends to lovers forced into a horrible situation and the trauma of losing your first love as well. It's so good and so sad. Prepare to be absolutely heartbroken. But if you haven't read it yet, where have you been? And then my wild card is Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Cesar. Now, one of the main characters is gay. One of the main characters is gay, but is out gay. And one of the main characters is, I kind of view her as asexual. She's kind of just there, hanging out, not really flirting with anybody, or like she just wants to make friends. Obviously, none of that is actually relevant to the narrative. That is just, if you expect people to fall in love, it's not who you expect to if you're in that cis-het normative mindset. This is about a young girl who moves to a new town. They are weirdly obsessed with clowns because this factory that used to have a clown face on the front burnt down, but there is a horrible, horrible rampage through a teen hangout party in a barn where they are. It's not pretty. This is your classic slasher horror, but with LGBT themes. I just want to see more LGBT rep in the horror books that I read. I'm actively going out of my way to buy more LGBT horror books. I've got Moonflow on my list, and a bunch of others that I'm hoping to get to. Chuck Tingle obviously has a variety of LGBT characters in their books as well. I need to find more, but I would absolutely recommend this. The 4th book is coming out, I think, later this year or early next year, and there is a film as well that is currently being optioned or worked on. So a great time, Pride Month, pick up some LGBT horror, get on that spook train, because it's a good time. When it comes to bisexual rep, apparently it's exclusively contemporaries that I want to talk about, and that just is what it is. The first one is The Girls I've Been by Tess Sharp. This is about a young girl who arrives at a bank with an envelope of money that she has helped raise for a charity with her current girlfriend and her ex-boyfriend. And she broke up with her ex-boyfriend because she didn't feel like she could commit to him, and then she fell in love with somebody else. It was all very awkward when he caught them kissing, and then the following morning, they all get caught in a bank heist and they are stuck in the bank together trying to escape. And she uses a lot of what has happened in her previous lives and things that she's done to help get them out of that situation, which just goes from bad to worst as we go. But what I really, really liked about this is that the bisexual rep is clear from the first page. Her dealing with an ex-boyfriend and current girlfriend, both of whom she clearly very much cares about and loves for very different reasons. They are very different people, but her adoration of those people was so clear from the first page. I actually did a bit of an analysis of this with some students in my class, and that was the thing that surprised them the most, was that it wasn't like part of the plot twist, part of the surprise that she's an LGBT character, like straight up she is bisexual. That just is who she is. I loved it. I loved how open her bisexuality was, because we have a lot of conversations about bi-erasure and the idea that these characters do exist and we don't see them often enough. I love that this one was out and proud. Another out and proud bisexual character is Danny Brown from Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is technically the second book in the trilogy, but I don't think it's a problem if you read them as standalones. All you find out is that the two love interests in book one of a romance trilogy do get together. Shocker, surprise, I don't really think so. This follows Danny Brown as she is working through her PhD fellowship, just trying to get by. She doesn't want a new relationship. She wants to be independent. She wants to stand alone. And she meets this tall, emotionally tapped in rugby player and falls in love with him. And things kind of go from bad to worse. They have a fake dating situationship whilst they're trying to avoid previous relationships and that toxicity, and eventually fall in love with each other. There are lots of really fun tropes into this, but I'm not going to spend all my time listening now. Again, this is another one where mental health is a massive, massive part of this narrative, so if that's a trigger for you, feel free to avoid. But I think, as far as, again, open and proud bisexuals, you don't really get more open and proud than Danny Brown, and I love that. But as I said in previous books, it is not always easy for people to come out. That is no less difficult for someone who is bisexual. So I would like to recommend you Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows by Bali Kwa Jasal. Now, I've not had an opportunity to recommend this for some time. I've not read it in a while, but this is a book that I come back to recommending wise constantly. This is set in southeast or southwest London. It is a bunch of Punjabi women who are essentially going and learning to write. Your main character is a creative writer. She's quit her last job. She gets a job at her local temple helping women do creative stories. She thinks it's going to be a creative writing workshop, but actually none of these women can read or write, so that is essentially what she's teaching them. But what they can do is tell stories, and what they find very quickly links them is that as wives they know two things: they know how to make a home and they know how to make their husband happy, and they have these erotic stories where actually finally they are putting their own pleasure first. And one of those characters discovers her own bisexuality through those narratives, and her family that are not chill with that, but it's really, really interesting to see how suppressed sexuality can have a real negative impact on, well, what's the phrase? Something of life? Quality of life. That repressed sexuality can have a real detriment to quality of life. It is a really, really powerful story. There is a thriller element in this when someone goes missing, someone is murdered. It's a whole thing. But I think generally if you enjoy literary contemporaries such as Candace Carty-Williams, thrillers like Oyinkan Braithwaite, and if you like Asian rep within your books, this is a great one to pick up for bisexuality rep. When it comes to pansexuality rep, I think there could be arguments made that some of these characters are bi-pan as opposed to just straight up pan. Some of them are more pan-curious, and some of them are clear pansexuals with more of a sapphic leaning, and that just falls into that kind of, like, again, like I said, spectrum of sexuality that I wanted to talk to you about. I have found that I, as a reader, enjoy female-led sapphic romances more than male-led gay romances, and certainly with my pansexuals you'll notice the women, they're clocking up over here. We do like a lot. I enjoy more female rep. Maybe that is because I find it easier to empathize with other women. Maybe it's because I enjoy female writers more. I don't really know. I haven't really looked into it mentally. But if you're wondering why there aren't more men on this list, that's my best guess as to why. So with that in mind, I have talked about this book before so many times on this channel. It was added to a dark academia list by the publishers, and still not enough people are talking about it because it is so good. The Library of the Unwritten by Eddie Hackworth is about a pansexual librarian who is trying to keep the books in line within the Unwritten Library. The Unwritten Library is a collection of books that a twinkle in your eye, a little gem of an idea that were never pursued. Maybe they were things that you started but you didn't finish, or they were just ideas that you had that never came to fruition. They end up in the Library of the Unwritten. So you can imagine how massive this library is. And sometimes the characters, with a little sprinkling of ink and a help from a muse, do escape. But they need to be brought back. They need to be brought back to the library. And this follows the pansexual librarian, her muse, a demon, an angel, and a hero wandering through the underworld, trying to get back to where they need to be and get the stories back and protected from outside forces that are trying to control the library and the power that it has inside. It is part of a trilogy. It is beautifully sad. It is incredibly sapphic, and I'm so here for it. More people need to read this. If you're picking it up because you like a fantasy, great. If you're picking it because you want LGBT rep, great. If you're picking it up because you like dark academia, she is a librarian. It is very dark academia vibes, and The library is like the dream place we want to be. Like, it's so beautiful, the writing style is great, and it's also just a lot of fun. Another dark academia that I would recommend for pansexual rep is Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas, another one that I've not had an opportunity to recommend for some time. This not only has LGBT rep, but has BIPOC rep as well. This follows a character who has ended up at Catherine House, this very elite, very secret society, culty, very dark academic themes before she even gets there, university, to study a variety of majors and minors and generally become a better person on the way out. But like I said, very much culty vibes. Is the place haunted? What is going on? But she is in love with everybody. She has sex with everybody. Very much pansexual rep. That is just how she explores her environment, essentially, is by having sex with everybody and loving everybody. So that obviously makes it all the more traumatic when people start to die and go missing. Again, suicide ideation, really decadent writing, but really, really dark themes. This is one where you have to really lock in mentally. I loved reading this. This was a book that I devoured over a couple of weeks, where I just would not put it down. Not that I couldn't put it down, I refused. It was so, so good. But so slow burn, very traditionally gothic, very spooky, very sinister, and a really unsatisfying ending that just made me want 100 more pages. So this is a 5-star read for me, and I love that I can recommend it again for Pride Month because of the LGBT rep. And then a sapphic pan fantasy with vampires, I would love to recommend you In the Ravenous Dark by A.M. Strickland. Now, this is another one that I devoured, I think, in a day. This may have been one of the ones that I read in a day, but essentially this follows a main character who finds out that through her father, she has access to blood magic. Blood magic is illegal. Anyone who has ever used or uses blood magic has to be taken, killed, what have you. She is then arrested when she saves her girlfriend and taken to the palace, only to discover that her father that she thought was dead is not dead, but is being used for his blood magic, and she is going to be used next. She is tied to a prince's spirit and reluctantly falls in love with him, whilst also falling in love with pretty much everybody else. It is a really, really interesting take on vampires and vampire magic, blood magic, etc. I really like the themes of necromancy in this. It's a really fun, fast-paced fantasy as well. Lots of violence. She is a messy main character, lots of drinking, lots of fun, and the pansexual rep in this is just fantastic. When it comes to the T element of LGBT, I have not forgotten, please don't panic, but what I have done is separated into trans non-binary and clear trans, but again, we've got some wild cards in here, so brace yourselves. In the trans non-binary camp, the first one I want to recommend is T. Kingfisher's What Moves the Dead. It's really, really interesting the way gender is presented in this book, considering it is not the main source of the narrative. A lot around language and linguistics and the idea of gender is explored through this, and I think the fact that it's an alternative history, an alternative world, very similar to Marie Brenner's Natural History of Dragons, where it feels like England and it feels like Europe, but it isn't. This book follows a main character who visits a friend they haven't seen in a long time, and there are creepy crawly mushroom things going on, and it's very Last of Us in narrative. But the main character spends a lot of time identifying their identity, discussing their identity and exploring who they are and why people respond to them in certain ways. Some people are more comfortable with their non-binariness than others, and it's a really interesting way to kind of look at when you're okay with your sexuality and gender, are other people, and is that your problem? So I really, really like this. It's a really, really fun horror. And I think one of my favourite things about it is the fact that T. Kingfisher actively says that they wrote this because in the original House of Usher, which this is a retelling of, they thought that the main character was just useless, leaving their friends behind, really incompetent. And you can see that there are certainly elements of that in this main character. They never make the right choice. You are screaming at them, and all the while hoping they make the right choice. They never do, and yet you don't mind as you fall along the story with them. I am now on book 3. I'm really hoping there's a book 4. It's a great time, would recommend. I have to start going backwards, I'm running out of space. A middle grade with trans rep is Pet by Kweki Emezi. This follows Pet, who lives in a place called Redemption, who discovers an angel. The angel has arrived in their city of Lucille because even though angels haven't been there for a long time, there are demons in their town that they need to find and destroy. And what you find out quite quickly is that there is a real balance between whether those demons are actual demons, whether the angels are actual sexual angels or whether they are a metaphor for something so, so much darker. There is child abuse and sexual abuse in these narratives, blood and violence and homophobia. So please, please, please treat this one with great care if you're picking it up. It is a really, really good book. It is written for middle grade. It is a very gently written narrative. It is very transparent in its themes and the causes of that. But most importantly, I think that non-binary trans rep is really, really important because it kind of takes gender and self-identity out of one of the causes for one of the most disgusting things that happens on our planet. Really, really dark, really, really beautiful. But please go in gently. And then the last trans non-binary that I want to talk about is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. Now, the main character in this, again, starts as a woman, becomes a man, but very much finds their identity as non-binary. They don't see themselves at all as a girl, but the masculine traits that they have are tempered by their femininity, and I think they would describe themselves as living in between. They are neither one nor the other. And this is a really interesting retelling of Chinese history, of how China, the empire, broke down into a kingdom and dynasty. There are certain characters in this who are non-binary not through choice. They have their sexuality ripped from them and are referred in a specific way. There is a real kind of dichotomy between the two characters of one accepting their non-binariness and one having it forced upon them and having their masculinity ripped from them and the violence that causes. It's really interesting to look at how misgendering can be destructive as a not just as a concept but as a practice as well. Yes, specifically in history, this is very historical with fantasy elements, but also in that contemporary light of how we treat people in the day-to-day. Really, really fun, high octane fantasy, very, very historical side of fantasy, dark, high elements, brutal, violent battles. If you're a big fan of like Game of Thrones and Brandon Sanderson, but you want better rep and you want more nuanced writing, I would absolutely recommend. And I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying more nuanced writing, but that is just how I feel about both those authors. I feel like I would pick Shelley Parker Chan over both of them any day of the week. And then I've got a more obvious trans story and a less obvious trans story, which is simply a transitional from one gender to the other. The first one is Melissa, which is the retitling of George, purely not to dead name Melissa, which I really, really appreciate. This is a middle grade by Alex Gino. It is very transparent in what it is. Melissa is exploring their sexuality and gender as a child, as a very, very young child, and exploring who they are and what that means to them through expressing themselves as Melissa rather than George. Again, it is not necessarily an easy job for them. It is not an easy sell read-wise. I know a lot of people have had real issues with this book. I do think it is probably one of the most basic entry-level trans rep books you can pick up, but for that reason, I think that's a reason to pick it up if you haven't yet. I think if you want a very paint-by-numbers way to explore being a trans character or a trans person, this is a great place to start. And I appreciate that I am saying that as a cis-het white woman. I appreciate that by stepping into this space, I am actively recommending books that are from a cis-het perspective good in representation of those. That is why I want your recommendations down below. What else can I read that has this great rep? And then the one where it's a surprise is Poison Study by Maria V. Snyder. This is a fantasy series, high fantasy series about a young girl who is locked away for killing her old master. She was a slave and sexually abused for years. She finally gets the gall to murder him, gets thrown away, locked away, until one day the general's assassin drags her out of her oubliette and decides that he's going to train her to taste for poisons. She then discovers a bunch of different things about herself. I am not going to spoil who the trans character is, because by doing that, it would not only spoil the story but be outing a character, but you do find as part of the narrative that a character is trans. And it is very much down to our main character to not out them or decide to use that against them. And a really, really interesting take on, as an ally, what do we do when we find out someone is trans? Do we continue to treat them with the respect we would before? Do we out them? How does it impact us, and why does it impact us? Also, while being wrapped up in a classic YA fantasy where you don't have to look at things too deeply. It's not too political, even though it is political. All books are political. But I just think again, another entry one, much like Melissa, a very entry level allyship book with trans rep, without it even being like the main point of the story. The main point of the story is a mystery in a fantasy realm with poisons. Good times. And then last but by no means least, we have asexual rep. Now, I saw that someone the other day said that Katniss Everdeen is asexual, and I've not been able to not think of that since. That has not left my brain since. I completely agree. I know that later on, prologue, epilogue later, years later, she has a baby. I get that. And I appreciate that she has an emotional attachment to two male characters. I think she's asexual. I completely agree with this theory. The way that she moves through her relationships, the way that she talks to people about relationships, I think is very asexual coded. So if you want an excuse to read Hunger Games again, also can we talk about the absolute oxidization of this copy? This is one of the OGs. This is an old copy. When did I get this? 2008 this came out. So one of the OG copies that actually, I love this. This is my favourite thing. You can actually change which cover you want. So you can either have Katniss or you can have Peter. So let's start with Katniss, and then for continuity, let's change to Peter because it's funny. I really like the idea of rereading stories that we enjoyed as teens and then coming back to them as adults and realising that they were so much deeper than they were when we read them. And I love the idea that Katniss could be autistic but is also asexual, and that's why she's on my list. Another character that I am absolutely headcanoning as asexual, which is the main character Hornclaw from The Old Woman with the Knife, which is a Korean thriller about an old woman assassin who is past her prime, starting to become dementia ridden, looking after her dog, struggling through life, everything hurts, and then having to fight for her life as another assassin starts to come for her. A really fun book, but a really interesting take on the fact that she was so hellbent on pursuing her career that relationships didn't even necessarily cross her mind. And I think sometimes that asexual rep is in those hidden moments. It's in the focus, the hyperfixation of other things that we think that, oh, maybe they're lacking for emotional attachment. And I really don't think this character is. I don't think sexuality or relationships, sexual relationships, romantic relationships are on her mind at all. I think it is her job, her dog, and staying alive. And I respect it. I respect it. And then the last one is Bat Eater by Kylie Lee Baker, where again, much like previous characters I've talked about, this character is out and proud as asexual. She talks about her relationships, she talks about her disinterest in sex, she talks about how uncomfortable she is with physical contact, and whilst a lot of that is tied to trauma, there are elements where she's talking to her singular friend and talking about how she's just not interested, she's never thought about people that way, it just isn't who she is, and I really like that kind of out and proud aromantic asexual representation in an otherwise gory, disturbing, insidious thriller gothic. This is far more slow burn than I think people were expecting, but I really loved it for those reasons. This follows a main character as she is kind of exploring the insidious racism that she is experiencing. She starts to notice as a crime scene cleaner that a lot of the crimes are being perpetuated around women that look like her, Asian women of a certain age, and she notices that no one seems to be doing anything about it. The actual culprit of all of that is so much more insidious than you could have guessed, so much darker and so much more deep dive conspiracy theory vibes than you could have expected. But again, a really fun one with an out and proud character who just owns their asexuality and aromanticship, and I'm here for it. So there you go, a whole range, full spectrum, as much as I can manage, with the books that I own, actively recommend, have given 4 or 5 stars from my own reading, that then additionally have great LGBT rep primed for Pride Month. Let me know in the comments down below, what is the next LGBT read you're planning on picking up? Would you be more likely to pick up any of these? Now you know my thoughts on them. Treat yourself to something from Waypoint because it supports me and my content. Check out the links down below because I have a Patreon now. And most importantly, have a nice day.